I'm James Jolly, and I'm thrilled to be sitting down and chatting with some of today's most inspiring artists. Welcome to this episode of Music Makers, a series in which we meet some of the most talented musicians on the planet. My guest today is a singer and conductor who's carved out a unique and always inspiring path through the world of classical music. She's Barbara Hannigan, and her single-minded vision and extraordinary creative gifts make her a mesmerising and deeply rewarding performer. I'm looking forward to finding out what has shaped this superb musician into the music maker that she is. Well, welcome. Our little black box has landed here in the Netherlands. We're in Hilversum, a place you are drawn to sort of for recording, but this is kind of a historical event, I guess, because something rather special is happening over the next few days.
Today in Hilversum, yeah, because a little bit later the Emerson Quartet will arrive and we'll start recording our almost last adventure together after 8 or so years of working together, you know, because they're going to retire in a year's time. So this is it.
And it's a sort of repertoire that I think, apart from sort of new music, which obviously we're going to talk a lot about, I sort of get the feeling that that sort of period, Second Viennese School, and then sort of around that is something that appeals very much to you as a musician.
Yeah, the kind of fin de siècle period. So, you know, that music that was like at the end of the decadence of Vienna, end of 19th century, and the literal decay and ferment into the departure from harmony, which is Schoenberg's second string quartet, which is what we'll record, as well as Hindemith Mélancolie, which is a strange work for soprano and string quartet, and then the Chanson Perpétuelle, which is also with piano, so that will be with Bertrand Chamayou.
When I was coming here, I was talking to a friend, and I said, "Oh, I'm off to the Netherlands to talk to Barbara Hannigan." And he said, "Oh, she's a contemporary music specialist." And I said, "Well, that's funny if that's not really how I see it. I see her as a musician who performs a lot of contemporary music, but I certainly don't see her as, you know, that being the driving force behind what you do."
Yeah, maybe 20 years ago, I think that would have been the case. Maybe even 15 years ago, but there was a turning point when, and it kind of came also, you know, at the point when I started conducting, where actually I started reaching back much further to my roots, because at the beginning of my career I was doing a lot more old music and a lot more classical music. I never really got very much into the romantic. But yeah, I mean, now, as far as my programming goes, you know, you probably see pretty well every program I do has Haydn on it. And I'm looking for kind of dramaturgical threads as opposed to, it would be very rare that I would present a program that would be all contemporary as a conductor. And as a singer, I'm still giving world premieres, that's for sure. But I don't even think of those labels anymore. It just doesn't come into my mind.
I mean, where did your interest in performing sort of, or giving premieres come from? It went back a very long way, I think, didn't it?
Yeah, my first world premiere was when I was 17. I was still in high school. I was in a performing arts high school in Etobicoke, which is just outside Toronto, Ontario. And there was a composer who had already graduated who wanted to write a song cycle for me. And at this point, you know, I already knew that I enjoyed the modern, let's say, I didn't know very much. You know, I'd never heard Ligeti, I'd never heard Stockhausen, I hadn't heard Boulez. At this point, I was 17, and I'd just come from Nova Scotia, so I hadn't heard much. But, so he wrote a song cycle for me, and I guess that was my first world premiere. And then I started at university, and my teacher was Mary Morrison, and she was someone that had worked with Ligeti and Stockhausen. She and her husband, who was a composer, were part of this circle in Toronto. There was a major modern music series, and all the composers were coming to Toronto and performing, you know, the newest of the new. And so she felt that in me, there was something that needed that freshness, that special architecture. So she encouraged me, you know, to explore the contemporary music, and I ended up, you know, hanging out with a lot of composers in and out of school, you know, also older composers who were already a little bit more established. And I just started premiering works all the time. I was part of a collective in Toronto when I was like 18 years old called Continuum. I think I was on the board or something, and we were premiering new works, you know, 4 or 6 concerts a year. And so this really became my life at the beginning, improvising, working with dancers, working with percussionists, electronics, all kinds of stuff. And it's funny because it was, you know, often for, you know, a small audience. It was a small community. But over the years, that's how it starts. It just starts with trust and relationship within a community, and that moves. Wherever you move, that moves.
And it must be exciting, though, being, as it were, at the coal face, you know, working with a composer, literally, this is the birth of this particular music.
Yeah, it was interesting. And what I was also learning was that there's no way to work with a composer. You know, I often get asked, you know, how do you work with a composer? I was like, you work with the person. I mean, some composers, you know, you can have a very open and direct contact with them and ask them to change things or work on things, you know, à la minute. And with other composers, you need to employ a completely different psychology. For example, when I worked with Pascal Dussapin, and he had written the opera Passion, and I was the lead female role in the opera. It was a two-hander, soprano and a baritone. And there were just some things in it that I didn't think I could perform well. I might have been able to sing them, but I didn't think that it was going to really work. And instead of talking to Pascal about it, I wrote him a letter. I mean, we were together in Aix-en-Provence, but just at the end of one day, I handed him a letter, and he took it home and read it, and then he came back the next day, and then we changed what we needed to change. It just felt like the right thing to do with him, but I never did that with any other composer.
Because, I mean, the whole process, I mean, as you're saying, it varies so much. I mean, there must be composers who basically hand over the music, and that's sort of, as far as they're concerned, that's the end of their part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, you know, someone like George Benjamin, I was actually listening to an interview with George yesterday, and I was laughing because he was being asked, you know, how much does he change his music once it's been written? And he doesn't change much, and he'd warned me about that. So when I sang Written on Skin, you know, he had said, oh, no, once it's written, it's done, I can't change anything. But then, in my score, he actually changed a note for me. And I can't recall exactly if it was because I sang the wrong note so many times he got used to it and started to like it, or if it was because he really did reconsider what he'd written. But yeah, there are some composers who don't change anything. In my collaboration with Hans Abrahamsson, for example, with Let Me Tell You, I was more changing text setting. That was almost all that I did in that piece. But in Hans's opera, The Snow Queen, we were changing things right up until closing night. Till closing night. We were bringing things up the octave. We were bringing things up. My first aria, we brought up a tritone, you know, a fourth plus a semitone. And we didn't even tell the orchestra. I mean, they were playing thinking, what is she doing up there, you know? Because we needed to try. So it's really different with everyone.
But that must be wonderful to be part of the, you know, the creative process, you know,
Yeah.
leaning over the cooking pot as it's all kind of bubbling away.
Yeah. And I mean, there are, you know, the Gershwin and Kurt Weill arrangements that Bill Elliott has made for and with me. I mean, we change things on the spot. We'll print new parts like after the first rehearsal, or he'll just go up, we'll just change things within the orchestra really at the moment, like the day of the show or the day before the show. He's from a different world because he writes for the Boston Pops, and he did all the arrangements for American in Paris, and so it's a different kind of flexibility that we don't see in the in the modern music
It's funny because, well, having spoken to composers, I've sort of said, you know, because when I've spoken to composers who come from the music theatre world, it's an utterly different process. You know, you have a sort of musical supervisor who actually will challenge you, the composer, and say, well, look, actually, this doesn't work, and have you thought of this? And you know, when I mentioned that to Pascal Dussapin, he was completely horrified that, you know, someone should do, but they workshop stuff, they go through, you know, a song might go through 30, 40 incarnations before they absolutely get it right.
Yeah, I mean, and you're working with a team and you're working with editors, and it's a bit more like film, where where it's in the editing that the film becomes what it is. But in the contemporary classical music world, I mean, certainly the productions that I've done in Europe, we don't workshop them, we just do them. And that's exciting, it's risky.
Would you like it if they said, okay, we're going to do a week of performances and, you know, we can tinker and,
no,
you know, no.
I don't like workshops. They do workshops a lot in Canada, and I have found that that can actually kill the riskiness of a show. I like when, you know, that we only heard the orchestration of Written on Skin 2 weeks before we were going to open. I can still remember that feeling in the room in Aix-en-Provence with Mahler Chamber Orchestra and George conducting, and just the support and the excitement and the curiosity and the willingness, because we only had one chance.
Because I mean, it is that, I mean, were you aware at the premiere of that particular opera that this was something special? Because it has become, you know, one of the most important operas of our time.
Yeah. That piece, yes, we knew. We knew, it's funny because when we first started the rehearsals for it, I definitely didn't know. I was like, what is this? It doesn't, you know, my final aria, I couldn't find my way in. I kept saying to George, I'm not sure this is really right for me. I wasn't sure I wanted to sign my contract for the touring. I really did. But once we actually were in the last 3.5 weeks, then we knew, and there was a buzz all around X. There was a buzz. And hearing the orchestra was only a confirmation of what we already knew, that this was really, and the piece grew. I mean, what we did in Aix-en-Provence was very good, but it grew to the Royal Opera House, to New York, you know, all the incarnations that we gave throughout our touring. It got better and better and stronger. But that was one of the few pieces that, well, that piece and Let Me Tell You, those were the two pieces that we knew that this was really special.
Because it's funny, when you watch Written on Skin, and your performance in it, you just think, well, this is just so Barbara Hannigan, because there's something about that role that we've sort of, there's a resonance to certain roles that, you know, I put that alongside Ophelia in Hamlet, possibly even Lulu, these women who've suffered really and are suffering badly at the hands of men, and they all, to a certain extent, take their lives. I mean, I would argue that Lulu,
it's actually, a suicide.
It's a suicide.
Yeah, assisted suicide.
She invites Jack the Ripper. I mean, that's why I always think, that's what's so exciting about you as artists. I couldn't really imagine you singing Mozart's Countess or, you know, Susanna, because I just don't think you would find the complexity and the sort of the post-Freudian depth.
That's right. The catharsis that the character goes through is so important for me. And it was, you know, Written on Skin and Lulu were right on top of each other, back to back. I was 40, 2012. Then, and shortly after that was Marie in Die Soldaten, who also we gave an incredible amount of power to in her role when we did that at the Bayerische Staatsoper in Munich. And then 2 years after that was Ophelia, who we also empowered. So yes, it's hard. It's important for me to have characters that go through a catharsis, that have agency over their own destiny. It was important for me not to do, like looking back, realizing that I was about 40, around all those things, and also that the conducting debut happened also around the same time. Everything was around turning 40. when I'd been a professional musician since, you know, my early 20s. I mean, my debut was 19 years old. I'd been making my living, let's say, as a musician since age 19. So when I would do a role, for example, Lessons in Love and Violence, which is George's second opera, in which the character doesn't actually go through a major catharsis. She goes through a trauma, but she doesn't change. I found that much more difficult. That's why as much as I love George and we adore each other, it wasn't a production that I was going to continue to invest a lot in, because I didn't feel that I could do anything more with it.
Because you're going to return to the role of Lulu, is that right?
I did.
You did?
I already did.
And what's that like, you know, a role like that after a reasonable gap?
Well, so I did 2 Lulu productions. 2012 was with Varlikovsky at La Monnaie. That's the one where I was on the point shoes. That was my first Lulu. And then in 2017 and 18, I did the Christoph Marthaler. We created a new production at Hamburg Staatsoper. Of course, going back to that production at age 50, knowing that the opening scene, you know, I'm in point shoes and basically underwear, on point, alone, coming straight towards the audience, you know, center. It's psychologically daunting. I was also nervous. Could I still sing it? I thought I could. But what was interesting, actually, was that the entire production was easier than the first time. And this I didn't expect. I had, you know, I'm on point for the entire first act, so 1.5 hours. Second act, I'm in very high heels. Third act, I'm in high heels, and then for the last scene, I'm back on the point shoes. So this is really tough on the body, and not just the performances, but the 5 weeks of rehearsal, 6 weeks of rehearsal. And then vocally, to reassume the marathon that is Lulu. I was, you know, I was basically, and the whole cast were, living in isolation, partly because of COVID and partly because we were just simply exhausted, because we were working so hard. But my feeling is that it was better than the first time. It had more depth. It had more humor. I had such a fantastic Dr. Schön in Bo Scovus, who I had sung another opera, Berenice, with at Paris Opera. So we were used to being kind of all over each other. So it was very fun and natural. And I mean, I walked away from that production on closing night with the feeling that if I never sing another Lulu again, I'm okay. It's been so fantastic. But I was thinking, if I could do another Lulu within 3 years, I could do it.
I mean, do you find it emotionally, I mean, physically, clearly it's draining, but I mean, do you find emotionally, because, you know, in the space of the length of that opera, I mean, it must draw such resources from you.
Yeah, it really, you've got to dig. But she's also funny. And I found humor in her this time that I hadn't used so much the first time around. So I could really have that kind of chiaroscuro that I'm always seeking. I could really bring that in a way that I found, it gave me, I wasn't as tired as I expected. And a very kind friend, a tennis coach actually, bought me a bathtub for after the shows. And I literally would jump into an ice bath as soon as I got off stage, which is great for recovery. I started doing that after he came to see the show, and he said, you need an ice bath. And so he bought me this. It's like an inflatable thing, and we put it backstage so that I could just jump into this icy water. So that helped.
So you were talking about your first Lulu, you know, when you were around age 40, and that's around the same time you started conducting. I mean, where did the conducting bug start? Because you've been working alongside some incredible conductors.
Yeah, I'd been working with
the best.
Simon a lot, Boulez, Andres. I don't think I'd worked with Vlad yet. Boulez, of course, and yeah, the conducting bug started because there was, well, it's one person who trusted me. It was a producer who's also a musician who was at Radio France. And we met somewhere around 2012 after a concert. He said, we need to talk, you need to conduct. And to be honest, he wasn't the first person that had said that to me, but it was the first person that actually made it sink in. And he said, no, it was 2007. It was 2007, because the debut was in 2010 or 11, something like this. And so he said it in 2007. He said, you should sing and conduct Ligeti Mysteries of the Macabre. That was his idea. And he said, and on the same program, you should just conduct something. And he said, I think it should be Le Renard by Stravinsky, chamber orchestra, 4 male singers. Shall I make that happen? And we made it happen. And we did it at the Châtelet in Paris with Avanti, which was Esa-Pekka and Jukka-Pekka's orchestra that they'd created many years before. And, you know, for me, that experience was a one-off. I wasn't about to change my whole life. I was about to do an event. I was going to conduct this concert. But what happened was the build-up to this concert, the feeling that I had inside, that this was a part of me that needed to be developed and needed to be explored as a musician, it was clear for me in the week before that engagement, and then in the following day when the phones literally started to ring, that this was going to continue and that my life was going to change, because I was going to have to change the equilibrium of singing and conducting. And that's what has happened over the last, 10 years.
Because you've really come up with a very distinctive style for doing it. Because, I mean, there's not an enormous precedent for singer-conductors. I mean, there was the occasional one, and actually, more often than not, the whole thing was rather sort of comic, and we were trying to just sort of stifle laughs as these tenors were sort of flapping around at the front of the stage. But you've created a way which is actually, it feels very collegial. You feel, the orchestra is around you and assisting you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like chamber music for 85 people. And that's what I'm trying to create. The better the experience is, the less I actually conduct. They should be watching my breathing. It depends, partly on the leader. It depends on the section leaders, how much people are willing to move. Orchestral players are taught not to move. So how much responsibility are they willing to take? I only choose to sing and conduct at the same time for very special pieces. It has to make dramaturgical sense. So it's quite rare. Many of the programs that I do, I'm only conducting. Or if I sing something, it's something that is not conducted at all. So for me, it has to be done with utmost care. And if I look at the beginning 10 years ago, I think, oh, well, of course I would do all those things differently now, but I didn't know. And I had to go through that process to arrive where I am now, so that the gesture really is, it's totally different for every single piece. It's very personal to me. And I think for me, it's something to do with that I have to be absolutely authentic. I cannot try to be a good girl. I cannot try to be a good conductor. I cannot try to follow the rules, because there are no rules except to be authentic to oneself. And then if I'm authentic to myself, 95% of the time, the orchestra understands completely.
Because, I mean, a work like the Ligeti Mystère, I mean, you've made that very much your own, and it's a dramatic performance. I mean, fantastically so. And I was watching a little bit of that rehearsal that you do with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra when you do the performance and it's utterly engrossing. And anybody who hasn't dipped a toe into Ligeti's world, that would be a wonderful way of doing it. It's funny and it's challenging and
it's a great gateway drug to modern music, and I think it's used like that. Every once in a while, the video of Simon and I doing the piece when I'm in the schoolgirl outfit, or the video of me singing and conducting, it surfaces again, and then it circulates on all the socials again. In fact, I chose to stop doing the piece, as I've chose to stop doing other pieces, because I didn't want, first of all, I didn't want the piece to only become associated with me, and also because, for example, Ligeti Mysteries, it takes so much focus that nobody remembers anything else that's on the program. So I can't, I thought enough is enough.
It's very difficult to do as a performer, because you get the impression that, you've got the vocal line absolutely, 150% in your head. But on top of that, you've got to hold this really very complex score together underneath that.
Well, it was difficult at first, but then I have to say, it's much more harder for the orchestra than me. The difficulty is rehearsing the orchestra and bringing them to the level that they need to be brought to from scratch, at the beginning of the 3 days of rehearsal that we have. But it wasn't that difficult for me anymore, which is probably also why it was fine for me to let it go, because I realized I needed something else, which is also why I started to create this new production with La Voix Humaine of Poulenc, which is singing and conducting, and created a whole, I thought, okay, well, now Ligeti was what, 16 players and 7 minutes long. La Voix Humaine is 40 minutes and 80-something players. So let's do that. Let's memorize that score, Let's bring that to and it's also a wonderful psychological thriller of a piece. So it became my latest,
And that's a sort of slightly different presentation, in that you have your back to the audience, but you're on camera and your face is behind the orchestra, which actually I think works incredibly well.
Yeah, I feel the piece actually is well, my feeling, and I wouldn't do it otherwise, is that we are serving the dramaturgy of the score. We have 3 cameras placed within the orchestra. We have a big screen behind the orchestra. I'm facing the orchestra for most of the piece. There are a few moments when I turn to the audience and sing to the audience. And in developing that piece, every gesture that I make has to do with what Elle, the character, is going through at the time. So when she says, when she's threatening him and she's saying, you're lucky that I love you, because if I didn't love you, this telephone would become a weapon, And then her next downbeat is a punch. And, it's funny, but it's absolutely true to what she inside feels at that moment. And so what conductor gives a downbeat as a sucker punch and then over and over, but it's true to the piece.
And does it change much, because you've done it with different orchestras?
Yeah. It's changed. Every performance is a little bit different.
How closely was it sort of directed? Did you discuss the sort of dramaturgy with the team, or is it something that comes from within you each night?
Well, the way I prepared La Voix Humaine was that I was in a studio with piano first, and I had the piano in front of me, so I was singing and conducting the piece just for the piano. And as I was doing this, first week, second week, third week, I was developing, okay, these are the beats. So I was memorizing the score, but at the same time, I was starting to think, well, instead of dun, 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 I could go bam, 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 or this downbeat could be like this, or how much do they need, or if we then brought the cameras in after a few weeks, and then I realized, okay, if we only cut the top part of the body, I can actually conduct under the view of the camera and use the left hand for another kind of expression. So the first 2.5, 3 weeks was purely musical gesture. Then with the cameras, then with the big screen and the 3 cameras, always getting advice from my team as I continued to work. And then it was just the normal 3 days of rehearsal with the orchestra, and then you're opening. So I couldn't use the orchestra for anything technical. I had to be completely ready for them by the time, that we started those orchestral rehearsals. But it was so fun.
I bet.
Yeah.
It also must be interesting, having become a conductor, the whole dynamic of a performance when, you know, for years you had been on the stage making a noise yourself. You're basically standing there silent, sort of facilitating other people making the noise. I mean, what was it like the very first time you actually conducted, you know, without making any physical noise yourself?
Well, that was the Stravinsky Renard, and actually I remember very clearly the feeling. I remember the humility. That first downbeat, I remembered the feeling of humility and powerlessness. And that was very interesting because, you know, having worked with a lot of different conductors and seen a lot of various behaviors over the years, it actually explained to me why sometimes the conductor does not engage the right use of power. Because one must understand your role within the dynamic. And one must, I think, have a comfortable sense of psychology, or a comfortable sense, but have an understanding of psychology, have an understanding of one's own ego, be able to handle all the energies that one is being met with within the orchestra. There will simply be some people that don't like the leader, and that will happen in any business. But how to handle that, you know? And so when I see all these young, super young conductors, I think, oh my goodness, am I ever glad I didn't start till I was 40. You know, at that point I was, you know, psychologically, I would say emotionally mature enough to be able to handle and begin to handle this kind of dynamic. And I always wonder, what kind of training are the young conductors getting besides how to conduct? And, you know, we see certain people, for example, Klaus Mekela, who is so young, but who is so extraordinary. I mean, I was this morning or yesterday watching a video of one of his rehearsals in Munich. I mean, and he's, you know, he has a natural psychology. He has a natural presence, confidence, kindness, you know, so special, plus extraordinary musical talent. I can't imagine that is the case with every young conductor. They may have one of those things, but do they have everything? It's so interesting to
But there's also,
consider.
I think there's also a different dynamic if the person standing on the podium is a proven musician. You know, your orchestra knows you can sing. You know, the Berlin Philharmonic know Daniel Barenboim can play the piano, and so on and so forth. And it does seem to, there's a respect there that can't be denied.
I think when I started conducting, I was only going to orchestras that wanted me to come without being marketed. I wouldn't allow the management that I was with at that time to market me as a conductor. They could only put me as a singer. So it was spreading by word of mouth. And when I came to an orchestra, more often than not, I had already sung one or more times with that orchestra. So they knew the kind of musician I was. That had already been established. So that was my entryway. I didn't have to go proving that I was a good musician I had to prove that I could lead and show what I wanted, but that's individual to each conductor.
And now you've got official posts with a number of orchestras. You know, you're a guest at the Gothenburg Symphony. You have associate artist of the London Symphony Orchestra. You have certain residencies. You work frequently with the Ludwig Orchestra here in the Netherlands. I mean, is the dynamic different when you're, as it were, when you're family?
The dynamic is different, yeah, and I think that's why I like to return to the same orchestras. So every year I'm with Munich, every year I'm in Copenhagen. Radio France, I have 3 weeks a year already since the last 4 years, and we continue. LSO relationship is beginning. Gothenburg, I've been principal guest for 3 years, and we've renewed that. One can build every time. It changes the pressure. Of course, we still have a lot of pressure. Every program is challenging and difficult. But it changes the way that we can interact. And it changes also the programming, you know. And again, that's trust and relationship between me and the orchestra, and between me and the orchestra and the audience, because they will come to hear anything if they trust us.
You mentioned early on Haydn, popping up in nearly all your programs. And I always get the feeling that Haydn is a conductor's composer. You talk to, someone like Simon Rattle, and he will kill to do a Haydn symphony. I mean, what is it about Haydn that attracts conductors?
Yeah, I think it was Simon that suggested at the very beginning that I should be programming Haydn symphonies, and I started with 49. And it's very interesting to me because I don't really adore Haydn's vocal music. It's so strange because I never enjoyed singing it so much. I mean, The Creation is an enjoyable piece, but I don't need to hear it very often. But the symphonies, they're like operas to me. There is something so theatrical within them. And so after 49, I just started choosing, I think it was 86, and then 96, and then 90, and 44, and 26, and 64, and they're just, and they become. It's for me, it's very important that they're never used to fill in a 25-minute gap on the program. That they really are part of the dramaturgy of the program. So I very carefully choose that particular symphony to be part of the program. 90 is very comic. It ends up on a program with a lot of theatrical pieces. 44, 26, 49 are all, lamentation, kind of sad passion, trauer kind of pieces. 96 is, the miracle, it has aspects of love in it, almost romantic love, I would say. I work with my librarian. I always buy an entire set of parts. We go through, we decide on all the bowings, all the articulations. Every single part is marked. And that set is then sent to the orchestra, whatever orchestra I work with. And from that's our roadmap to begin working on the symphony. I totally know what Simon means. I wish I could have met Haydn. It might have been dangerous, but there is something so deeply human, passionate, emotional, dramatic in that music. For me, he and Ligeti seem to be very similar composers, very similar. The humor, the structure, the drama, the dramatic sense, also the anger, it's all there.
I remember Christopher Hogwood, he used to have a wonderful analogy that when he talked about, he said Haydn is like a great chef who invites you into the kitchen and shows you all the ingredients and then creates the meal, whereas Mozart emerges from the kitchen with this beautiful dish finished, and you don't know how it's done. Right.
I can imagine that. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Yes, there's something, you feel the construction. You're looking at all the ingredients within, and you can decide which you may want a little bit more of, à la minute.
And you, since we're in the world of cuisine, I mean, you're a keen cook. I mean, is that one of the things that sort of grounds you in this incredibly peripatetic life?
Yeah. I mean, it was quite a long time ago that I started staying in apartments and not hotels, even if it was only a week. I would travel with my knives. I would travel with a little suitcase of some of the basic food spices that I needed. The cooking, for me, at the end of the day, is a kind of dynamic meditation. It requires my concentration. It also came out of not wanting to go to restaurants. They're loud. I can't speak in a restaurant. I would tire my voice out too much. Having control over my my dietary intake, you know, my health, really. So that is so integral to being on the road, especially when I was creating these programs where I couldn't be replaced. You know, my whole life, I've been either one of one or two singers in the world that knew such and such a piece, or I was doing a sing-conduct program where if I got sick, who was going to replace me? So the pressure was very high. So I would do everything that I could to try and make sure that I was staying as healthy as possible.
Because, I mean, cooking, I always think, is an incredibly creative process. It also has the advantage that actually, at the end of the day, you have something that is life-sustaining.
Yes.
But it's also a way of sharing.
Yeah.
And also, almost more important, if you're in a different place and you're actually cooking, it's an incredible way of getting to know that culture in a way that you probably wouldn't in any other instance.
That's
really.
true. That's true. And in all the different cities, you know, I would know where the markets were and what was the market time, and, you know, in Gothenburg or in Munich or in London or wherever I was. And I remember also singing at La Fenice and sending a friend to the market because I couldn't go that day. And I said, just go buy things that you don't know what they are, and we'll figure it out, you know. For me, this was so enjoyable at the end of a long day.
It's because when I talk to, because I'm a very keen cook too, and when I talk to friends and I say, oh, I'm just going to start cooking, and I say, yeah, but how long are you going to cook for? And I said, well, hour and a half, and they just can't understand it. No, I said, no, it's incredibly relaxing, even though in other ways it's quite challenging, and it's also, you know, you have to get your timing right. You know, there are so many little elements that actually, when you pull it off, it's enormously satisfying.
It is, and I always find it a big warning sign for myself if I think I need to get takeaway. Then I know I'm really tired.
So at the moment, your career, you've got a sort of balance between singing and conducting. I'm suspecting it's moving slightly more conducting to singing.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah, the conducting is 60 to 70%.
Is that much?
Yeah, yeah.
And where do you sort of see paths that you're going to explore? I mean, how do you kind of plan? Because it's sort of tabula rasa with you. You know, you've got 10 years. You've been conducting for 10 years. You didn't come through the traditional conducting route. How do you decide where you're going to alight?
The relationships with the orchestras are really important, and returning to the orchestras, developing programs with the orchestras, and I work with a few wonderful friends, mentors, who help me decide what and where and why. And if that involves me singing, or if it doesn't involve me singing, that's absolutely fine. That doesn't matter, as long as I'm absolutely passionate about the program. So my list, you know, it's 2 pages now, so that's quite a long list if you see the font size. And I definitely need my reading glasses for it now as I get older. So there is a lot for me to do that I'm interested in doing. And then certain pieces come up that I realize, oh, actually, Beethoven 4, that would be the first Beethoven I would do. Yes, okay.
It's funny, that's another conductor's, you know, if you talk to conductors about the 9, they often say, oh, but I love 4.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. Well, that's good. Mahler 1. So now this season I'm doing Mahler 4 a lot. Mahler 1 is definitely the next one of the Mahlers. And it may be the only other one. That may be like that. Fine. And then I need to get into the pit. Whether it's conducting Lulu as the whole opera, or whether it is, which probably will happen, or whether it is making a special project that is in which I'm in the pit, and who knows if I will emerge or not, that I need to have that experience.
When I look at your programs, you just think, wow, you sort of look at it and you think, wow, and then you think, actually, that makes such a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the fact that you precede the Very Men with Strauss's Metamorphosen, which is a work I'm absolutely passionate about. But I mean, how did you alight on that particular juxtaposition?
Metamorphosen with La Voix Humaine. Well, the way that I play La Voix Humaine relies on two lines that she says towards the end of the piece. Les choses que je n'imagine pas n'existent pas, ou bien elles existent dans une espèce de lieu très vague. So she says, the things that I don't imagine don't exist, or rather they exist, but somewhere very vague. For me, that dictates that the entire La Voix Humaine is a fantasy. And when I come from that premise, that there may have been a boyfriend, there may have been 5 boyfriends, there may never have been a boyfriend, then I'm going deep into a woman who is in a turmoil, who is in a time of change and questioning and isolation fantasy. And then I looked for what companion piece would make sense with this. I wanted a piece that was so absolutely emotionally heavy-hitting and true before La Voix Humaine, because I didn't want La Voix Humaine, even though it's a fantasy, to be anything other than very emotionally true. Whatever she goes through, whether she imagines it or not, those emotions are real. And so when we set the scene with Metamorphosen, with the depth of emotion of every character, I mean, in Metamorphosen you have memory, Sehnsucht, nostalgia, loss, pride. I mean, there are certain leitmotifs in the piece that are so, to me, so clearly how proud we were, how, you know, and then watching that from afar, watching it crumble away. So for me, it's an extraordinary companion for that story in La Voix Humaine, which seems to be about a breakup, but it's not about a breakup.
Is this a difficult work to conduct? Because I mean, it's, you know, it's written for 23 solo strings, and it breaks down into this incredible sort of. You can almost see the sort of the musculature of the work because it's so sort of fibrous. It's almost like you're weaving the piece together rather than conducting it.
Yes, it's different with every orchestra. I've now done it with 5 or 6 orchestras. With some orchestras, I'm more emotional than with others. And that depends on their energy. I'm thinking particularly of Munich Philharmonic, who are a very emotional orchestra.
And one of the opera houses, of course, was their opera house.
Right. And playing Metamorphosen with them, I needed actually to be more sober in my gestures and more clear because they were getting very emotional within the piece. So I needed to be much more the bones of the piece for them. Whereas Radio France, which was the first orchestra I did La Voix Humaine with, I was so nervous to conduct Metamorphosen with them the first time, or with anyone, but with them, you know. And I love that orchestra. And we just ran it, you know. And then they applauded. And I'm still emotional because it meant so much that we could make this piece together and make this opera together, because it's an opera. And Strauss's phrasing, the lines, which means we have to do free bowing. Everyone has to be a soloist, and everyone has, at certain points, to be in free bowing, frei wechseln, so that we can achieve the legato that we want, and the tension and release. And it's so intimate. You're just bearing your DNA, you know.
I mean, I always think that when you hear a performance of Metamorphosen that doesn't work, it's simply because you see the workings too much, or you hear them. You've got a kind of, you know, you can't have threads popping out of the texture, which sometimes happens.
That can happen, but it also has to do with the trust, I think. It can just have to do with the chemistry between the players themselves. Are they really in chemistry with one another, and with the conductor? And sometimes it just doesn't. I mean, I'm not speaking particularly about Metamorphosen, but sometimes the chemistry between the person on the podium in the orchestra doesn't work. And there's no good reason for why that is. Nobody walks into a gig with any other feeling than we all want this to work. And then sometimes the chemistry just doesn't work. And that's life.
I agree. It is extraordinary, and there's no explanation. I mean, an artist you've had extraordinary chemistry with, and it's produced some incredible performances. And here we are in the Netherlands. We should talk about Reinbert de Leeuw, who you obviously sort of really clicked with. He's one of my heroes, and there's something very special about him.
Yeah. Well, Reinbert and I first started working together in 1999. I was singing in Writing to Vermeer, Louis Andriesen's opera. And I mean, he was so happy with me from the first rehearsal because he felt he could trust me. And so he basically, after that opera was finished, he started hiring me for many, many things. And I decided to move to Holland. It turned in 2001. I mean, in 2001, it turned out that he actually had an extra apartment that he gave to me. And so I lived one floor below Reinbert for quite a few years, which even made our friendship closer. We were having dinner, his door was always open, literally always open. And I could go and ask him for advice, and we could talk about music, and then we started working together. He was as pianist and singer, and he was making programs. He'd just come downstairs and say, I have a new program for us. And he would just tell me what the program was. It wasn't like, would you like to think? No, I have a program for us. And so, we had the Viennese program, we had a French program, we had a Russian program, we had a Satie program in our recital partnership. And we were still working together as conductor and soprano. And I mean, his way of making music, it almost, I would never have wanted to page turn for him because I wouldn't have been able to see that what was on the page was what was coming out. He was so unique in his sense of space and time. And psychologically, his devotion and support to composers was extraordinary, but not only to composers, also to the orchestra. When I first started conducting, he said to me, be careful how they treat you. I said, what do you mean? He said, they will give you things. They will do things for you when you're a conductor. Don't think that you deserve it. That's a poison. Make sure you look at the players at the back of the string sections. They're every bit as good as the players at the front. He was like, when he wanted a point to get across, he'd make his eyes really big. And don't forget this, And of course, I took it to heart. And this relationship that we had until our last performance together, which was at Aldborough Festival in June 2019, when he just simply, when he finished, he said, I can't play anymore. I can't do a recital anymore. But, even after his death, February 14th, 2020, I was talking to one of our friends, and we were saying, he's still here. It's not, I have never experienced that with someone else's death, that, I miss him so much. But he's with us. With all those musicians that he inspired, he's still somehow with us. It's extraordinary. He empowers us still. And I don't know that feeling with any other person in my life who's disappeared.
Was it through him that you discovered the Claude Vivier Lonely Child?
Oh.
Or that was a different route? Because he, of course, recorded it a long time ago.
Yes. The first time I heard Lonely Child performed was Reinbert de Leeuw. It was at the Beurs van Berlage in Amsterdam. That was the first time I heard the piece, but I knew Vivier's music before I met Reinbert. I knew it in Canada. But I remember one Christmas dinner as I was about to sing Lonely Child for the first time, which it was going to be in North America, and Reinbert was at my place for Christmas dinner. And he and I were sitting at the table studying the Vivier score and going through it and talking through it. And he didn't realize that he'd pushed something over one of my beautiful linen napkins that I only took out at Christmas time. And it caught on fire by one of the candles. But we didn't realize because we were so engrossed in looking at the Vivier score. And then he went, oh, something's on fire.
Because that's now a work that you really sort of embraced into your repertoire, and more now as a conductor than a singer. More
as a conductor than a singer, but what's funny is that I'll actually conduct Lonely Child with the Concertgebouw Orchestra in December, beginning of December this season, and then the next morning I'll fly to Montreal to sing it. But what I also love is that whenever I conduct the piece, I have the same soprano singing it, a Greek soprano, young woman named Aphrodite Patoulidou, and she is extraordinary. She's extraordinary at many things. She plays the nyckelharpa, she writes music, she writes poetry, she takes incredible photographs, and she sings the stars of heaven. And so for me to have had the chance to mentor Aphrodite for the last 4 or 5 years, and to help her at the beginning of her career, as so many people helped me, is also very special. And I'm sure Reinbert would have loved the way she sings the Vivier.
We haven't talked about your Momentum initiative. I mean, here we've got quite close to it. I mean, when did that sort of form a sort of a germ in your mind as to do it?
Well, I have 2 initiatives. I have Equilibrium, which I created in 2017, which was a mentoring initiative for young professional singers mainly, and some conductors at the beginning of their career. And then in 2020, I created Momentum, which was also a mentoring initiative, but more of something that arose absolutely because of the COVID-19 pandemic, in which I was encouraging many, many leading artists to share the stage literally with their younger colleagues so that they would not lose their momentum during this time because there was so little work. So I was engaging the support of everyone from Simon Rattle to Natalie Dessay to Bryn Terfel to literally bring younger artists onto the stage, share their fee, have the organizations share the fee, Momentum would contribute some of the fee, and all of a sudden they had experiences that were giving them energy and, inspiration.
And is Momentum, I mean, the name not only implies that they're getting a push, but as Momentum as a thing, is it going to be a long-term thing, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, when I created Momentum, it was because of the pandemic. And George Benjamin, who's also part of Momentum, he said, well, he hopes that in a few years it won't be necessary. We've slowed down. I'm not sure if that's a good sign or not. But I think we have also established that, for example, audiences are excited when they see a leading artist introduce a younger artist that they're interested in. Orchestras are absolutely fine to allow the assistant conductor on the podium. If you just explain to them, these people can only learn by conducting you, so give them 15 minutes, the orchestra will be fine,
Because there is this weird sort of catch-22 that, until you've stood in front of an orchestra, they can't know whether somewhere you've just got to throw them on and say, look, just do it, and let's get it going.
Yeah, you have to throw them on, and the orchestra, I mean, everyone will tell you, the orchestra knows if they want to play for a conductor within the first 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
They feel it. So it's great for the young conductor because they've got 10, 15, 20 minutes, and they establish the relationship, and then they get feedback. And with the other initiative, Equilibrium, I mean, that's now been going since 2017, and we have more productions, and we have engagements all year long, and workshops, and so on. So it's a bit of a different story. I just finished 2 weeks ago in Canada a workshop with young artists, and we were it was like a kind of very high-level summer intensive working on our mental discipline, working on our instruments, how we interact, what do we want out of this career, you know, and are we putting our attention where we want to put our attention?
And now, as you know, as you were saying, conducting takes, you know, maybe 70% of the time. It gives you an opportunity to also to say, when you're, you know, casting a concert, if that's quite the right term, well, actually, there was somebody that I think would be really great. And that must be terribly satisfying.
It is. It's wonderful to give somebody a leg up. I mean, I look back and, you know, I mean, I'm incredibly thankful for everybody that helped me. Sometimes I wonder, what did they see? You know, I remember myself as being very nervous and I had very high performance anxiety, and yet the conductors would give me, or orchestras would give me a chance, and then they'd give me another chance. Maybe I hid it very well, I don't know, but you know, I learned so much from these people. It was extraordinary. And I always say to the young artists, you know, remember that the leading artists, the older people, that if we're still in the business, we're probably very thankful, and we're probably very happy to give you time and advice if you just ask.
Where did your mentoring, who mentored you in your early days as a conductor? I mean, did you, you know, the actual craft of conducting, were you actually sort of given a few hours or days
Pointers.
or weeks, you know, this is how you do it?
Well, when I made the debut, I hadn't actually taken any lessons. I went to one friend of mine. I kind of kept it not secret, but pretty private. And I went to one friend of mine, and he helped show me how to mark up a score. And for the rest, I was getting a little bit of advice here and there, but I knew I basically just had to get my head down and study. And that's what I did, and I learned the scores. Later, like maybe a year after that, Simon Rattle invited me to co-conduct Facade with him, you know, with the Berlin Phil players as a late night, and we were sharing. So he would do the text, and I would conduct him, and then the players, and then we'd switch. And after that, I was at the airport the next morning, and I called him to thank him, and he said, you know, you should really take some lessons. And he said, you should go study with Panola. You know, that would be good. Go have some private lessons with Panola. So I went to Jorma Panola in Finland. I had private lessons with Jorma for the better part of a year, I think, or maybe it was 2 years.
What is his, I mean, he's someone who fascinates me, and at some stage I'm going to sit down and I'm going to gather all the Jorma Panola pupils together and interview them. But what is the secret of this man? Because his track record I mean, he identifies people that he thinks will make great conductors, but what does he do that produces this incredible generation, or these incredible generations?
The Finns, yeah. I mean, the people that went through his program, that's one thing, you know. I mean, I was just having some private lessons with a pianist. Simplicity, no nonsense, clarity. He doesn't say much. I'm not sure that he would like the way that I conduct now. I'm not sure that he likes the way most of his students conduct now. He trains you for something very clean. And that was very helpful for me, very helpful. And the plan was, you know, Simon said, you know, go to Panola, learn some technique, and then come to me and do some work with me. And so after Panola, I went to Simon, I had some lessons with Simon. I would spend quite a bit of time with David Zinman, who was also very helpful with me. I call up my friends, other conductors, asking here and there for advice. Sometimes it's not even about the piece itself, it's about the situation. And sometimes they call me, and we help each other, you know. Yeah, and you know, I had the chance to sing Mahler 4 with Panola conducting. And it was 2014. And that was very enjoyable, because I don't think very many people get to see Jorma conduct anymore. And it was very beautiful what he did. It was very beautiful. It was very much himself, and elegant, and a little bit proud. But it really, really worked.
The great thing about taking up conducting, of course, is that, you know, conductors, as far as I see, don't retire. They just carry on and on and on until one day, click, that's it, they stop. I mean, you know, Herbert Blomstedt, you know, still going very much strong at 92, 93, whatever it is. So when you, presumably when you've decided that the 70-30 mix becomes 100% conducting, you've got a whole new career, well, not a whole, a second half of a musical career ahead of you.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I mean, I've worked with a lot of the old guys, you know. I worked with Boulez during his last year of conducting, and we were touring Plis Selon Plis. I have to say, something happened in Canada recently, which I found kind of disturbing. We have Lisa Laflamme, who was our national news reporter, and it's also been in The Guardian about this situation, that it seems to be that at 58 years old, she was let go from her position as our national news anchor. And not every reason, but one of the reasons has to do with her aging. Whereas our other anchors in the news retired in their late 60s or early 70s, the male anchors. And then when I saw that, you know, there was a point when she allowed her hair to go gray, and that was questioned by the television, CTV, national news. Who let Lisa's hair go gray was the question during the pandemic. And it really made me think, because I always expected that I would become an old conductor on the podium. And then I thought, well, I hope that there isn't some strange rule that only the men gain authority by getting older, but the women don't. So we shall see.
Because there's nobody as yet.
No, I mean, I think the oldest is now, around is the matriarch, let's say, is Maren Alsop, somebody like that, right? So I'm very curious to see what will happen. Because I had every intention of becoming an old conductor on the podium. Bring it on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, here's to many, many more years of having you on stage, whether singer or conductor. Thank you so much, Barbara. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Are you more comfortable surrounded by noise or silence?
Silence.
If you could choose the sound of your doorbell, what would it be?
I would like the doorbell to sound like a doorbell. Ding dong.
What is the sound you wake up to?
Oh, well, if I'm at home, it's my cat Louisa, because she is the leader of the 3 cats who is in charge of waking me up to bring them their breakfast.
If your life was a movie, what would your theme song be?
Probably da-da-da-da-da-dee-da-da, which is Lulu.
What to you is the most relaxing sound, and what's the most irritating?
I love the sound of rain, not too heavy. Irritating, kind of scratching, high-pitched scratching sounds.
What sounds remind you most of home?
We lived by a lake, so it was the sound of the waves kind of lapping against the shore.
What's the first sound you remember hearing?
The first sound that I remember hearing was my mother playing piano downstairs in the evenings while we were 1 floor upstairs in our beds.
What sound makes you think immediately of a happy memory or a happy place?
Campfire.
What is for you the most musical sound not made by an instrument?
Well, then I think it would be, you know, animals. I mean, nature, birds, but other animals as well.